Welcome to Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Hello, everyone. This is Gary Wilson, and welcome to this week's version of Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women, the podcast for you who are professionals in your fields and industries and often business owners. Again, like an orthodontist who owns her own orthodontic practice. Welcome aboard. Our philosophy is we don't really advocate the no money down owner financing investing, although we do that. It's not the end all be all. It has its place, but it's just not in every place. So we do get creative, but sometimes it's creative on the back end, puts us in control. We also invest honorably and ethically in our areas, and we make it a win-win for everybody, the community, the tenants, the owners, everybody involved. It's long-term, more prosperity for all those involved and for you particularly. So welcome aboard. If you haven't joined the community, please feel free to do so. You can visit myinvestmentservices.com, click on the members area. And if you're not already a silver level member, you can click on the button to give you the info on that. You can decide to join if you like. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. The podcast, Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women, is available on 75 different channels, including iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, so forth and so on. So in any case, enough of that. Good news is we got a great guest today, Chuck Blakeman. His podcast is Get Off the Treadmill, and he's very versed in the couple industries, particularly the dental industry and also in investing. So he's a great candidate for this podcast and has a wealth of experience. We just were talking about one particular area that we both know and appreciate. So Chuck, welcome aboard. I appreciate you taking your valuable time and expertise to share with our folks here.
My pleasure, Gary. This is what it's all about. I'm excited.
Good. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, Chuck, just to provide a little context for everyone, we'll get into some what and some how and some why. But just start off with who you are. For some people probably know you, some people may not, and bringing this context in will help them appreciate more about what you're sharing.
You bet. I have a family, my wife and 3 kids. I'm left-handed, right-brained, ADHD, dyslexic. I graduated near the bottom of my high school class. It took me 19 years to get a bachelor's, and I think I came out of high school thinking if nobody could ever get a job, it would be me. And then I went into the Army because I knew they had to take me because I did have a college or a high school degree. And while I was in college, I started my first business, found out I had something to add to the world. And since then, I built 12 businesses in 8 industries on 4 continents. I'm a serial entrepreneur. My poor wife and kids have put up with that their whole lives. And so the story of my life is relentless.
Yeah, I love it. I tell you what, most people I've ever met who are successful, it wasn't because they were born into it or were the smartest or the tallest or anything like that. They just simply were just relentless. They persistence. That having that dogged determination and it takes faith. I mean, you got to, sometimes it's tempting to just give in because everything's against you. When you're in business for yourself, you know that, but just don't ever give up. My gosh. So I'm glad you got that out there in the first 60 seconds. That's awesome.
That's the beginning and the end. If you're not relentless, you're in trouble. It's not for the lucky and it's not for the gifted. It's for the relentless.
Yeah. In fact, I think there's a book I read titled Relentless. I wish I could remember who wrote it.
Well, there is a book out there titled Relentless, and that's actually a book I'm writing. You can't copyright a title. That book's about 20 some years old, and so I've been working on a book with somewhere near the same title, Relentless: A Story of Never Giving Up. And it's not just my story, but it'd be the story of a lot of people who have gone that direction and the science behind it as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah. I agree. Hey, if you wouldn't mind a little more context here. You mentioned early in life you started a business. Would you mind sharing what that was and what your experience was? Was that, did you eventually sell it or?
I've only failed at one business, and that was actually a nonprofit oriented business. We were attempting to solve poverty in Africa, and I threw really all my life savings at that, and that's turning out to be a failure. That's my only giant failure. Everything else has really more than broken even, or we've sold it. In most cases, I simply drifted away from it because, again, as an ADHD dyslexic, I went to music school. I didn't go to business school, so I would get bored with businesses. and I'd find the next one, and I'd move on to it until I found some things that I absolutely loved, which I've been doing now for the last 10 years, in 12 years, just advising other business owners on how to build their business, particularly in the dental space. So the first business I got involved in was, it actually was, ironically, leadership development, leadership consulting in the Army. And I look back and I cringe. I wonder how many people's lives I damaged as a 26-year-old in the Army, pretending I knew something about leadership. It was a joke, but I've done all kinds of crazy things. Landscaping. I landscaped my yard, and somebody knocked on my door and said, "Who landscaped your yard?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "Well, I'm putting in 80 acres over here. I'm putting 80 houses on 40 acres over here. Can you landscape those for me?" And I went into the landscaping business. And so I've just kind of been all over the place, importing leather luggage from Colombia, and direct mail and call centers, website development, branding and marketing, just everything across the board. Probably one of our more successful businesses was a logistics business. We went from 2 million to 9 million in under 3 years, and sold it to the largest firm in that industry. So we had a good run, but I've been all over the map, and it took me probably 40 some years to figure out what I really enjoy doing. If people ask you, what do you want to do if you grow up? I would never say, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it took me until I was probably 45 to realize that the answer to that wasn't a vocation for me. The answer to what do you want to be if or when you grow up has more to do with the contribution you can make. And I realized I wanted to have an impact in other people's lives. I wanted to live well by doing good. And I'll do whatever I have to do that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And what's interesting, you're obviously, you have the entrepreneurial gene flowing through your blood.
Sadly, yes.
That's it. Yeah. You're a subservient entrepreneur. And it's funny, I knew this about myself early on. I just didn't pursue it. But what really struck me as unusual was I love building businesses. I just don't like managing them. And so what would happen is I build them up to a certain point, they'd plateau, and I said, okay, been there, done that, and I would sell it. And I'm thinking, is something wrong with me? Turns out everybody I met who's an entrepreneur does the same thing. It's just part of how we're designed. So the thrill is in the building part.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was always good through the first iteration. If you make me go around again, I'll kill the business and everybody in it. It's, so I'd have to sell it or move on. And so I've learned that about myself, and I get other people to manage the day-to-day.
There you go.
Who love doing that and who are really good at it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, this is probably resonating with a lot of business owners out there. We do have a lot of business owners following the podcast, and hopefully that makes you feel a lot better about yourselves, and don't beat yourself up. Have fun, nourish that entrepreneurial and creative and genius gene, and nurture it. And when you build it, there'll people come along to want to buy it and maybe be better managers than you and I. So
So if you don't, Gary, if you don't mind, I'd love to give a little tool for people that I've learned. It's not just for business owners; it's for all of us, but it certainly does apply. I learned early on, because of my ADHD and my dyslexia and just my view of the world. I did a lot of things that didn't seem to work out. And I learned a different language for success and failure. I read a book a long time ago called The Art of Possibility by Zander and Zander. It's a good little book, easy read. And they talked about being fascinated instead of, too often we go to the other F word first whenever something happens, but, get the fascinated as fast as you can. And the idea behind that is no matter what you're faced with, whether you perceive it to be a failure or you perceive it to be a victory, everything in life really only deserves one response. Fascinating. And I added to that, fascinating. How did that happen? So that if it's something you didn't like, fascinating. How did that happen? You want to learn from it so you don't repeat it. And if it's something you loved, fascinating. How did that happen? Because you want to learn how to do it again. What do we do when we win? Or, when we lose, we go get drunk. And when we win, we go get drunk. There's no learning in that. So we learn to call, instead of talking about mistakes, we never talk about mistakes in our business anymore. We talk about seminars. And there's two rules in seminars. Seminars, so a seminar is something you thought was a mistake, but it's not. It's just a learning opportunity. And there's two rules in seminars. Go to the shortest, least expensive seminar you can, and try not to repeat a seminar.
There
So
you go.
to me, that's really helpful language around this whole idea of success and failure. We spend way too much time beating ourselves up for things that went wrong when we should be looking at it and saying, all right, fascinating. How did that happen? How do I make sure that doesn't happen again? Or how do I make sure that good thing happens again? So hopefully that tool will help others. It certainly has helped me.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, if I could, let's talk about maybe one of your real estate deals, or maybe an early one when you first got started. That might be good, because a lot of the folks we're speaking to are new or newer, or maybe they've got a dental practice they've had for 3 years and are ready to build some passive cash flow. But if you wouldn't mind, give us an example of one of those, and we can maybe dig a little deeper on some strategy and things like that.
Sure. Well, we had no clue what we were doing. We didn't have any, when we first invested, we didn't have any idea at all. And we didn't really invest in the classic sense. What we did was we moved from one state to the next. And we did that. We moved 7 times in the first 14 years. And every time we moved, I just instinctively looked for the worst house in the best neighborhood. And I mean a dog. It would take realtors 2 or 3 days to really believe me that I was looking for something. I wanted to hear it bark a block away. It was so bad. Give me a dog. And that's what we invented. So our first one was just that. It was at the end. It was the end of the runway at Ocean View Naval Air Station in Norfolk, Virginia, and across the street were some apartments. But it was this beat up little Cape Cod that wasn't worth anything. And we moved into it, and I renovated it as we lived in it, and then we sold it for a nice little tidy profit. And we moved on to Connecticut, and we found another dog in a great neighborhood. This was one of our better deals. Each house had an acre, and these houses were all 8 years old. And the realtor found one that had been the mother, the father in the family had died. The mother took the insurance, bought her son a house, a nice little 1,600 square foot home on an acre. And he moved in with his rock group, and I mean, they never even mowed the lawn. We found a car buried in the yard, in the weeds in the yard after we bought the house. It was that bad. It was structurally in great shape and cosmetically absolutely destroyed, which is just a wonderful combination, because everything was there. The furnace and all the HVAC, it was all great. The roof, but the place was destroyed cosmetically. So we bought that for. We offered something. They came through and appraised it for $5,000 less, and we ended up getting it for that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we bought it for $35,000. We put $8,000 in it, and 2 years later we sold it for $120,000 in an auction. So we just did that. That was our introduction, was to do a lot of that myself. And it's one of the things I would advise against for others doing this. Don't buy them and renovate them yourselves. But it was a very good experience for me, because it helped me understand when I could get other people to renovate for me. They couldn't pull the wool over my eyes, and it was just good experience to have done it myself, but not necessary.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you pointed out. When I teach people, I teach them, train them, coach them, all that. I'm a little bit of a contrarian, because most teachers and coaches will say, don't manage yourself, don't do anything yourself. And I do agree with that. However, in the very beginning, if you roll up your sleeves and get hands-on experience in the first 1 or 2 or 3, it will serve you well long-term, because like you said, Chuck, you'll understand what's required, and you understand what to expect from other service providers, and they'll know what to expect, And management is a crazy business, but I ended up building a big management company out of my business actually years ago, and it was because I learned how to do it myself first. And then I decided I don't want to do this anymore, but what the heck, I'll corporatize it and offer my services. And it took off like a bandit. But in the beginning, I did do everything myself, almost everything myself. So I appreciate that experience. And by the way, I went to school at Old Dominion University, so I know exactly where Ocean View is, and Willoughby Spit and Norfolk Naval Base. I used to go there and get my commissary and get my groceries,
420 East Ocean View Avenue. That was our little house.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a big sneak preview here. I go back there, I just was there in July. So I lived in Virginia Beach back when Virginia Beach was still mostly strawberry farms and stuff like that, but not anymore. In any case, I I'm building an investor community out in Tidewater. Tidewater is what we call that greater area,
Yep.
Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Chesapeake,
Yep.
Suffolk, Hampton, Newport News. And it's a stable community, obviously tourism, military, some agriculture, and some pretty solid business there too in Norfolk. And so I'm going to go back there because I want to spend more time there in the last half of my life. And all my friends are there, but it's still very well priced, favorably priced there. Lots of a strong renter community. And obviously you can do a lot of flipping there. So big hint for those of you who are watching or listening to this, and you're in that area, pay attention because I bought some domains years ago, like Hampton Roads Real Estate Guide, that I plan on fully exploiting.
Well, it is a great area. Before we moved into that house, we lived on the other side. We lived in Hampton. Yep. And that was where I actually it was the first place we lived in when I got into the Army, and it was a fourplex. We lived upstairs in one of the two upstairs apartments, and that was the first place I got my eyes open to, hey, this woman has a pretty good thing going here. She had two of these fourplexes in Hampton near the water, and she was getting a pretty good price for them. And I did the math on what she was getting for those things, and whatever her mortgages were, she was living off of two fourplexes. It was a pretty good deal. So it's like, okay, I got a taste of this just through this woman's savvy. She's not the big time operator, but she's got it going on here. And I saw the value you've talked about before in getting into something more than a single family environment.
Yeah. It's interesting. I used to I interned at NASA Langley Air Force Base. I worked on the space shuttle program and lived in a little town called Poquoson. You remember Poquoson?
Oh, absolutely.
You know what? Poquoson is Indian. It's an Indian word. You know what it means?
No.
You're going to get wet.
Well, that's the Tidewater area. You're going to get wet, whether rains, humidity, fall in the water. You're going to get wet. That's perfect.
Yeah. So in any case, let's do this. So you talked about the early days. Basically buying well below market value properties that had a value add component. Basically physical, structural things. Cosmetic and all that. But moving forward. Where are you now? Like what's a recent example? Have you bought larger properties, more units per purchase, and what's that look like now? I want to give people what the future could be for them.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. Number one is I would strongly encourage people to find a reputable person to learn from, like you, and or take courses. But that's really tough because I'd say 95% of the courses out there are not really, I'm trying to be nice. They're really not healthy uses of your money. Too often, there are people who have failed at investing and are making all their money off telling other people how to do it when they really don't have a good track record themselves. So you really have to vet that well. But I found a guy here in Denver who really was good at it. Yeah, so getting into bigger and better properties, we took a course from a reliable guy. We learned that the bigger the property, the more stable it was in terms of your investment. It's pure math. If you have one person in one house and that person leaves, you now have an empty house with no income. If you have a fourplex with four people and one of them leaves, you got three covering it, and so we've gradually moved up, and now we're into a 24-unit complex in Knoxville. We've looked at vetted some opportunities out there with some people, and we're looking at our second 24-unit complex in Knoxville, and those seem to be the right direction for us to go. But I'd say for most people, you want to start either start by investing with others or start small.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that sentiment too. I know for me, I learned also from everything I've ever accomplished in life was I can tie back to me learning something from someone else, taking their program, just mentoring with them. And one of the key things was all of the best investors, the ones that have thousands of units, they all progress up. They grow vertically. They buy bigger and bigger properties. And I can tell you from a personal experience, it gets easier to finance, it gets easier to manage, but start where you are. If you got to start with a duplex, start there. But have your sights on the fourplex and then use that as a stepping stone to the eightplex. But no matter what, just get started. And like Chuck said, get the education. You can never be too smart. I'm always learning. I'm learning from you, Chuck. I'm always learning. And whenever I learn something, it's like 10 more doors open up for 10 more things to learn, Well, I appreciate you. Hey, you mentioned Knoxville, you mentioned Connecticut, you mentioned Tidewater, Virginia. We talked, you and I talked about this before the podcast. I'm tending to favor now more of the smaller metro areas like Knoxville, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Lafayette, Indiana. They're just, nobody pays attention to them. It's easy to find, people and properties. So as far as geography goes, what have you found there in your experience investing?
Yeah, one of the mistakes we made when we first started looking was that we looked at fairly small towns that seem to have really good return on their values. You can buy a place for $90,000 and rent it for $1,100, and it was just a really nice return on your investment. But one of the things that we didn't realize there is that they lag well behind the market, and they come back slower. So you don't want to get into really small markets, even though it seems appealing. When you have a recession, they will drop faster and they will come back slower. So you have a lot less resistance to the economy in real small markets. But when you get into a bigger market, or you get into a fairly small market that has some insulation, and to me, insulation means built-in renter base, that kind of stuff, like Durango, Colorado, isn't very big. But it's got a really nice college crowd, and there's a lot of insulation against economic downturns in that kind of environment. Fort Wayne, Knoxville is much bigger. You get into those environments; they're not huge, but they're big enough to be insulated against that big crash. So that I like the smaller, mid-sized markets, and then you find those little niche markets like Fort Wayne or others where, for some reason, even there, it doesn't seem to bother. When the economy goes down, it kind of acts like a big city.
Yeah, I love your explanation of that. It helps a lot. So now, timing-wise, here's another interesting subject. I started back in January 1986, and of course, you probably remember all that happened there: Tax Reform Act of '86, the crash of '87.
Oh yeah.
So four cycles, one major one, but has it been your experience that regardless of where we are in an economic cycle, investors generally are always in the game in some way, shape, or form? Have you experienced the same thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And one of the problems with investors that sadly you can take advantage of in hopefully not in a negative way, too many investors are too optimistic. And so they get themselves in lots of trouble when there is a downturn, which happened, of course, in 2007 and 2008. There were people buying properties based on what they could do later. And that was one of the most valuable things I learned from my buddy here in Denver was buy a house that's insulated against the worst possible scenario down the road. Like buy a house that if your rents drop 40%, you'll still be able to break even or do better than break even.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of guys out there buying houses where they already weren't breaking even in 2007. And then everything went to pot from there. It was a mess. So that's one of the things I've learned is do not follow the numbers. Do not follow your heart on this stuff.
Yeah, make data-driven decisions. Numbers don't lie, and don't have a game plan based on hope. Have a game plan based on facts.
Exactly. The random hope is the number one strategy in business, and it's the worst strategy possible.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I'm having a lot of fun with this, and you're bringing a lot of smiles to my face. And I want to go ahead and let people chew on this. But is there one final thought you can share with people? Words of wisdom, maybe a big why for yourself that maybe other people would resonate with. Something that drives you.
Yeah, I think if you're investing, if you're doing anything for money, you're in the wrong game. And the same thing with investing in properties. My big why, my vision for my life is to live well by doing good. And living well for me is more about helping other people get where they need to go and having enough good things going on in my life that I have the energy to give and that kind of stuff. And so I really think that when you approach investing in property with the idea that you actually want to make the world a better place and you want to benefit the people who are in there or will move into those properties, those are the much better reasons to do this rather than how much money can I make out of this. My first book was called Making Money is Killing Your Business. And the reason for that is that if you're in business to make money, you're likely to make very little of it. If you're in business to solve a problem or to do something bigger than make money, you're much more likely to make a lot of it. So I would go into investing with the same mindset. Figure out what it is you want to do to make the world a better place, and then figure out how you can use investing to get that done.
Yeah. I love it. We have a philosophy called prosperity through service. Serve first and you shall prosper as a result. And sometimes it doesn't seem the way, but long term, that approach always is going to serve you well. And hey, Chuck, you mentioned a couple of books here as we're going. If you could, to wrap things up, I got a feeling people are going to want to learn more about you, reach out to you, maybe be part of your podcast. What can you share with our followers here? How can they get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
Sure.
If you don't mind, share that,
Not at all. Very easy. ChuckBlakeman.com. B-L-A-K, not B-L-A-C-K. It's not Blackman, it's Blakeman. People make that mistake a lot. ChuckBlakeman.com. BLAKEMAN.com. So that'd be the first place you could start. And you can find the books there. You can also find them on Amazon. Making Money Scaling Your Business is a book for people to figure out how to build a business. And we've worked with a lot of real estate people who have found that book extremely helpful, made study groups around that book in particular. So love to have you get that. And then you could email me at chuckblakeman@cranksetgroup.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience, Chuck. I mean, I love the fact that this world is, there are people who really do want to help and do want to, prosper through service, and you certainly fit the bill. So thanks again. I'd love to have you on again. For everybody listening, I think I speak for everybody. We thank you again for your time and experience and wisdom. And for everybody listening, God bless you and your families. We will see you next time. Real estate investing for professional men and women. Subscribe to on a number of different podcast channels and go to myinvestmentservices.com. Grab yourself some free books and join the community. We're all over U.S. and Canada, and we've got, the most important thing is we've got real estate agents we train called investor agents to work with you and I. We've trained them to work with us investors. They know what they're doing. I tell you, I wish I had that 30 years ago. So there's a whole army out there waiting to serve you. So come on aboard and hop on the train. Okay, you guys take care, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real Estate Investing for Professional Men and Women. Be sure to go to myinvestmentservices.com to join our community and start building wealth today.